they're doing now. But this is, as the Business Roundtable said, the Chamber of Commerce said, the debt ceiling is cataclysmic. They are playing with fire, and the American people know who's creating the fire.
Senator Reid, have you had any recent conversations with Speaker Boehner?
I don't talk about my conversations privately with Boehner or McConnell or with Pelosi.
Senator, there are a lot of government that Speaker Boehner.
Pardon me?
Were you surprised, though, that Speaker Boehner would go to the Gooder Amendment?
Well, I don't know. You know, he can try whatever he wants, but remember, just so the record is very, very clear, to put us on exchanges, and we are on exchanges. Every senator, every staff member of ours, 16,000 of them, are on exchanges, and every step of the way, Boehner knew what was going on. Every step of the way, McConnell knew what was going on. Pelosi knows what's going on. So to me, it's fairly disingenuous for him to now say that he doesn't want my staff to go on the exchanges. He doesn't want me to go on exchanges, but it doesn't matter. We are not going to mess around with Obamacare, no matter what they do. They've got to get a life, as I said here last Thursday or whenever it was. They should get a life. It is the law, declared constitutional. The exchanges are coming on board tomorrow. I give you the example of Nevada again. It's that way all over the country. And I look at this, one reason they're so afraid, it's just like Social Security. It's just like Medicare. You know, Republicans hated those two programs, but now they're so popular with everybody. And give it a little bit of time, Obamacare is going to be supported by 90% of the American people, just like Medicare. I was on a hospital board. I ran the biggest one in Nevada. When I came to work there, I was elected to that. 40% of seniors who came into that hospital had nothing, and people had to sign for them to get them in the hospital. Had to sign brother, sister, mother, father, whoever it was. And if they didn't pay, we'd go after them collection-wise. Now, 99.9% of all seniors who go into hospital have things paid for. And that's why people love Medicare, and that's why the Republicans are afraid of Obamacare, because just give it a little bit of time, it's going to be as popular as Medicare and Social Security.
Senator Reid, given how this debate is going, is it worth even doing it again with the debt limit, or would you advise the President at this point to just cut it off and raise it on his own?
So we'll wait and see what the Republicans want to do with debt ceiling and what the President wants to do.
Senator Reid, there are a lot of government employees that are going to have to go without paychecks if this does go through. And I understand you said this is a Republican shutdown, but at the same time, many of these people serve you your food every day, and you all will continue to get paid under a shutdown. What do you say to those people?
What I say to those people is this. Understand we're dealing with anarchists. They hate government. And who is the worst part of government from their perspective? It's people that work for the federal government, whether waiting on tables, whether part of the FBI, it doesn't matter what it is. We are going to do everything within our power to protect federal employees. And I say this without any qualification or reservation. We are not going to do anything other than wait for them to pass RCR, because otherwise government's going to shut down. Okay, good enough.
And back on the floor here on the Senate, they held a roll call vote right after they gavelled in this afternoon. They rejected the House bill to fund the federal government, which will officially shut down in about 4 hours without a House-Senate agreement. The House, at this hour, is working on a new amendment to send to the Senate, but it's likely to be rejected as well. The Associated Press says President Obama called Republican and Democratic congressional leaders trying to get some kind of breakthrough, but still no budging in this stalemate.
President, I would ask suspension of the quorum call.
Senator from Michigan,
Thank you.
without objection.
First, I would ask unanimous consent that the time for morning business with debate only be extended until 9:30 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, and that the majority leader be recognized at 9:30 p.m.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam President, let me speak for a moment about what we have happening here, and there's no reason for this happening, and there's absolutely no reason why, first of all, that we couldn't have worked together to put a budget in place. We, months ago, passed a budget in the Senate and have been trying to go to a conference committee with the House so that we could work it out and have a long-term budget that continues to bring down the debt. By the way, the deficit is coming down, which is very positive, but we know we need to continue to do more in a balanced way. That could be happening. It's not happening because the same people now who are putting us in a position where in a few hours there may very well be a government shutdown are the same ones that don't want to negotiate to get a budget for our country, which it's very difficult to understand here in terms of what the strategy is other than to just obstruct. So we're now in a situation where we have agreed to a compromise that would allow the continuation of funding of public services, from safety to health research to what we do around education, innovation, small business, a whole range of things, for 6 weeks. So we are talking about 6 weeks, and the compromise is that while we believe that we ought to be reinvesting in education and innovation, we ought to be creating jobs, rebuilding our roads and bridges and water and sewer system, and doing a number of things that would strengthen our economy and create jobs. For this 6-week period, we agreed to continue the funding level at the lower level that the Republicans want. So the continuing resolution that we have sent to the House is a compromise by definition, because we are willing for 6 weeks, while we negotiate a broader package on a full year's appropriations, to continue funding at the level that the Republicans have asked to be the spending level. By definition, certainly for many of us who believe we won't have a middle class, that we can't grow the economy without doing the right kinds of investments, and that we certainly should not be cutting back on cancer research and cutting clinical trials for women with breast cancer, or cutting back on other possible cures. And that's happening right now at this lower level. But for 6 weeks, we've said we are willing to compromise with the House Republicans in order to continue funding the government while the larger issues are worked out. Instead of that happening, what we are seeing is a fight that frankly has been fought over and over again. It was fought in the last election, where it was very clear we had a President of the United States who ran on and who made a signature accomplishment of his first term, health care, access to affordable health insurance for all Americans, running against someone who said he would repeal that. And the President of the United States won with a substantial margin. In the Senate, we had Democrats running against Republicans, Republicans saying, elect me, and I will repeal Obamacare. Democrats saying, no, we need health reform. We need to create a better, more competitive way to bring down health insurance rates, like Massachusetts, the home of our distinguished presiding officer. Our candidates, Democrats, won. So I would suggest that in many places, and certainly across the country with the President of the United States, the people of America spoke pretty strongly. So now we are here, and we all have seen the intensity of what is a minority opinion. I appreciate that. It is very, very intense. But it is a minority opinion in this country. So the minority of a minority are trying now to essentially slow down or stop the economy, hurt middle-class families, bring public services to a standstill, because even though they lost in the election, even though there's not the majority view, they've decided it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. They're going to shut things down if they don't get their way. And what I find particularly appalling is that on top of delaying or repealing what we're going to see tomorrow when healthcare.gov comes online are more competitive, lower rates for many, many Americans, young Americans, families, and so on, people who maybe couldn't get insurance in the past at all, moms who, or moms-to-be who couldn't find maternity care, 8 million women in this country who've not been able to find insurance companies that will cover them for maternity care because somehow being a woman was a pre-existing condition. They're going to have a chance to do that, which means we'll have more healthy moms, we'll have more healthy babies, and this is a good thing for our country. We are seeing now in health reform that's already taken effect, hundreds of dollars a year more in the pockets of senior citizens that they used to pay out for prescription drugs. But they don't have to do it anymore because we're closing this gap in coverage from the Medicare prescription drug bill. Now, as a caveat, let me say that as somebody at the time, 7 years ago, who voted no on that Medicare prescription drug bill because I believed, and the majority on our side believed, that it was written way too much in favor of the drug companies as opposed to the seniors in terms of costs, not allowing Medicare to negotiate group rates and so on. When we lost that fight, we didn't shut the government down. We didn't try to stop funding the implementation of Medicare prescription drugs. We didn't do all of the antics that have been done. We said, okay, we lost that fight, so let's make it work the best we can make it work, and we'll fix it later. So we didn't stop the funding for the educational efforts for seniors. We didn't spend hundreds of millions, or I don't know, maybe it's billions now, trying to scare people, confuse people. We said, let's try to make it work. And even though in the May before the prescription drug bill took effect, 21% of the public said they wanted it, they supported it. 7 years later, 90% of the public says they support it. And now in health reform, we are able to fix one of the things that many of us were concerned about then. Rather than stopping the ability for seniors to get some help, even though it wasn't structured the way I would like to see it structured, rather than stopping that, we said let's make it work the best we can and look for opportunities to make it better. Now, under the Affordable Care Act, we have made it better. We have made it better by closing the gap in coverage, which has been dubbed the donut hole, so that gradually under health reform this goes away, which will mean literally thousands of dollars in the pockets of many seniors. I would suggest to our colleagues in the House and the minority of the minority here in the Senate who want to shut things down because they have not gotten their way on health reform, that it would be so much better for the American people if they chose the path that we did on Medicare prescription drugs, which is to try to make it work the best that we can, and then to look for ways to make it better. So instead of doing that, what we have is a situation where we are being held hostage, public services are being held hostage to eliminate something that, frankly, the majority of people already voted to say they wanted to put into place. Fix it, yes. If there are problems, yes, fix it. But they certainly don't want to go back to hundreds of dollars a month for a family for a policy that covers almost nothing, which is what has happened all across Michigan and all across the country, a situation where women get discriminated against on the basis of rates just because we're women, or we can't find preventative care, or we can't find maternity care as women. We certainly don't want to go back to a situation where a family has a child who gets a serious illness and then suddenly finds, after spending hundreds of dollars a month on a policy that doesn't cover anything much, that there's a cap on how much care they can get for their child. So they end up with thousands of dollars in out-of-pocket expenses, maybe going bankrupt, maybe losing their house, because even though they were paying for insurance, it didn't cover what they needed. And then, by the way, there's a limit on the number of treatments you can get, and oh, by the way, now that your child has a serious chronic illness, you can't get insurance anymore because you have a pre-existing condition. This is the world from which millions, tens of millions of families have been operating for way too long. We don't want to go back to that. I'm certainly not going to be a party to going back to that. So we've said no. We negotiate on the budget, be responsible, focus on jobs, move forward, yes. Take us back to a time of bankruptcy for families when there's an illness in the family? No. Take us back to a time when women are charged more than men just because we're women? No. Take us back to a time when seniors are paying more out of pocket for prescription drugs because of this gap in coverage? No. And we could go on and on and on. And, you know, so when we look at this whole approach, and then I do have to say, given the fact that we as women gain so much under health reform in terms of protection about unfair rates, getting preventative care without out-of-pocket expenses, access to maternity care, many women for the first time, so many other things. Majority of those on Medicare are women. So many ways in which we benefit. We now see the House over and over again sending us something that would delay or end health reform, and then today, on top of everything else, they've decided not only do they want to stop the next stage of health reform, but by the way, we want to repeal what already is the law of the land now on preventative care for women, on family planning services and mammograms and all of the other preventative services that we know save lives. And the amendment that all of the women, Democratic women, authored under our leader, Senator Barbara Mikulski, which made sure that going forward, preventative care would be available and affordable, no out-of-pocket costs. That was repealed in what was sent to us today. Now, it's also interesting, preventative services for men were not repealed. Only preventative services for women without out-of-pocket expense. So we find ourselves now in a situation where we are waiting for the House to send back something else again that will chip away at health care and put in jeopardy the ability for the federal government in the greatest country in the world to be able to provide services tomorrow, whether it's safety, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's the basics like traveling with your family and needing a passport, or visiting one of our national parks, or any number of other things that affect us, protecting the air and the water, and what we do to support our farmers and so on. So that's where we are. We will once again indicate that we are willing to compromise on the budget issue. This is a budget issue. Support the level of funding that the House says they want, not what we want, because it underfunds critical investments in services and hurts the middle class. But for 6 weeks, as a compromise, we are willing to operate the government at the level that they want, but we will not take the next step, which is to take away the ability of millions of Americans to have access to basic health care. Tomorrow is an important day for so many reasons, but one of them is that for the first time, citizens across the country are going to be able to begin to get the information they need from healthcare.gov about what is available for them and their families in terms of new health care options. From what we've seen so far, the rates aren't only competitive but lower than was estimated that they would be. And in fact, for most families and most individuals, they're going to be able to get much more care. They're actually going to get something they're paying for, and they're going to be able to receive it at much less cost than they currently can. So tomorrow's an important day where, as they say in Michigan, the rubber meets the road. People will begin to find out for themselves, despite all the stuff that's gone on for the last 3 years, all the misinformation, the scare tactics, the millions of dollars, the horrible ads that have been run. Tomorrow, people will be able to judge for themselves. We certainly expect it'll take a while, just as it did for Medicare prescription drugs, for it to fully take effect. People will have 6 months, first time around, to figure out what they'd like to do to be able to sign up for next year. If we find that there are things that need to be improved on, then we need to come together and do that. And we are more than willing to do it. But we are not willing to go back to the days where families couldn't find any care for themselves or their families, or couldn't afford it. Because we, in fact, are the greatest country in the world, and health care is pretty basic for each and every one of us. And we need to have a system which begins tomorrow through private sector insurance and competition to have a way to be able to lower costs for families while making sure they're actually getting the care that they're paying for. That starts tomorrow. I hope tomorrow, in addition to that starting, that we're going to see a continuation of critical public services in our country, and that we'll send a message around the world that America really can get its act together, that this Congress really can work together and be responsible and not see the kind of incredible partisan games that have gone on, not by everyone, but by a minority of the minority who are right now holding things hostage in this Congress. We can do better than that. I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to work with colleagues on both sides of the aisle, in fact, to do that. And I'm hopeful that the Speaker will just very simply put a continuing resolution on funding the government before the full body of the House of Representatives and let them vote. We have heard from many House colleagues today, Republican colleagues, saying that if they have an opportunity to vote on continuing the operations of government, that they will do that. A clean CR, continuing resolution, that would allow the continuing functioning of services that the public depends on, and those, by the way, who are providing as well, are depending on. And so the Speaker just simply needs to allow a vote. Up or down vote, just allow a vote this evening. And I believe if he does that, he will see a bipartisan vote in the House of Representatives to be responsible and do the right thing. Thank you, Madam President. I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Quorum call.
The House is
Without
expected to
objection.
vote here in a few minutes
I have a
on
moment.
whether to fund the federal
To
government.
the floor, and I thought that there were others wishing to speak, and since they are not, I want to take one more moment to speak about something else that is running out today, that I am deeply involved in and deeply concerned about, and that is the Farm Bill, the 5-year agriculture, nutrition, conservation policy of this country. We are seeing the end today of the extension that was put in place last year because of House inaction. Starting tomorrow, we essentially begin to operate on fumes. We will see a time period, a few weeks, when we don't see the full impact of having no Farm Bill, and it is incredibly important that we use this time immediately to negotiate a final Farm Bill that will not only reduce the deficit, as our bill does, of $24 billion, but one that can get strong bipartisan vote, as we did here in the Senate, with over 2/3 of the Senate twice voting for a comprehensive reform bill that addresses supporting our farmers and ranchers from a risk management standpoint while eliminating subsidies that don't make sense from a taxpayer standpoint, strengthening crop insurance, strengthening conservation to protect our land and air and water, focusing on regional and local food systems, farmers markets, small farmers, to support them as well, new jobs in bioenergy, as well as investing in rural communities all across America through our rural development efforts. You know, what we call the Farm Bill really is the rural economic development bill for the country. 16 million people work in this country because of agriculture. It's the biggest jobs bill we'll pass. And our farmers, all of those impacted, have been waiting and waiting and waiting, and frankly have had enough. They want this to get done. So call on House colleagues again to join with us to be able to finally get this passed into law. This is incredibly important for the economy, for small towns like the one where I grew up in Clare, Michigan, all across Michigan, all across the country. It's incredibly important for our efforts to continue to protect our soil and our forests and our air and our water, and to be able to maintain the beautiful outdoors that we do and support for hunters and fishermen and others that we do through efforts in the Farm Bill. It's incredibly important that this get done. It is long overdue. So I couldn't let this evening go by without indicating that on the long list of things that have not been done, the September 30th date is incredibly important for rural America, for our farmers and ranchers who need help when they have a loss, for our families that need help when they have a loss, and for our ability to continue to grow jobs. Our largest area of exports is in agriculture. It is a vibrant, important part of the economy. There is no excuse for this not having already been done. Again, too many games have been played on this, attacking families that need help, choosing not to proceed in a responsible, balanced way as we did in the Senate. And I'm recommitting myself again, as I have day after day, tomorrow, to make sure that I do everything I possibly can, and I call on House colleagues, on the Speaker, to do everything that they can in order to finally get a 5-year comprehensive food and farm and jobs bill done so that we can continue to grow a very important part of the economy. I would yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Could the senator pull your request on that? Thank you. Senator from Washington.
Madam President, thank you. And I know many of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle are really deeply frustrated this evening because once again, with just a few hours left on the clock, House Republican brinksmanship has us struggling to avoid burdening our families and our economy with more dysfunction and more uncertainty. This pattern is simply unacceptable. And some of us, Democrats and Republicans, have been trying for months to break it. When the Senate budget passed, I was hopeful that we could move to a bipartisan budget conference where Democrats and Republicans from the House and from the Senate could all come together and sit down and try to work out our differences. Democrats tried to begin that budget conference 18 times. Many Senate Republicans agreed with us that we should begin negotiations and begin working towards that deal. But each time, Tea Party Republicans and Republican leadership stood up and said no. And, Madam President, they made it pretty clear why. They believed that they would have more leverage in a crisis, like the one we're hours away from, than they had a few months ago when we were asking for orderly negotiations. Instead of working on a bipartisan budget agreement that would strengthen our economy, Tea Party Republicans began manufacturing this crisis to defund the Affordable Care Act, a law, by the way, that is helping millions of Americans, and beginning tomorrow, shutdown or no shutdown, is going to begin helping many more. And due to Republicans' refusal to come to the table, we are now scrambling to avoid a shutdown. Madam President, I'm confident the American people, including many in my home state, are looking at House Republicans and asking the same question many of us are. They're asking, what are they thinking? And why would they hurt their own constituents simply to make a point? Because even if Tea Party Republicans don't want to admit it, a government shutdown wouldn't just impact people here in Washington, D.C. It will be felt across the country. In my home state of Washington, the impacts could be severe. First of all, Washington State is home to tens of thousands of federal employees who will be furloughed or stop getting paid. But it's also home to one of our nation's largest veterans communities. And the VA has confirmed now this week that if the shutdown goes long enough, disability and GI benefits will stop for veterans in places like Tacoma and Everett and Spokane, all because some Tea Party Republicans in Washington, D.C. can't have their way. And that's not all. if the Tea Party forces this government to shut down, our state's gorgeous national parks, the Olympic National Park, Mount Rainier, will be closed to the public. Students at the University of Washington and Washington State University may not be able to access new student loans so they can pay their tuition bills. Funds for important public health programs like WIC could be cut for women and children who really rely on them. And federal support for dozens of Head Start facilities in Seattle and across our state would be at risk. Now, the good news is, Madam President, none of this has to happen. We still have time. And the Senate has passed a shutdown prevention bill that would avoid all of this harm. The Senate's short-term funding bill would keep the government open at current spending levels with no changes in policies while we continue to work on that important long-term budget deal. Now, the Senate bill by no means, again, is a long-term solution. It's not even close. But as we work to bridge the gap now between the parties on our bigger budget issues, the absolute bare minimum that Congress should be able to do, the very least that we owe to our constituents, is to not actively hurt them and sabotage the economy, but by playing partisan games with a temporary stopgap continuing resolution, like trying to take away health care for millions of Americans, Tea Party Republicans are doing exactly that. Madam President, even if their fellow Republicans believe, many of their fellow Republicans believe that this is an irresponsible and unworkable attitude. Many Republicans have spoken out to discourage their own colleagues from waging this pointless, harmful fight over defunding the Affordable Care Act. They have agreed with Democrats that while we might not see eye to eye on everything, we don't have to abandon our basic responsibilities, like keeping the government open, in order to negotiate. Madam President, we desperately need this kind of common sense bipartisanship because we have seen repeatedly that families from across the political spectrum are sick of governing by crisis and the uncertainty that it creates in their lives. They're sick of gridlock in Washington, D.C. that impacts everything from their child care to their paycheck. And unfortunately, Madam President, it seems that the House Republicans haven't had quite enough yet. They seem to think this is some kind of game, that whoever's left holding the hot potato will be held responsible. Well, let me be very clear. The American people are a lot smarter than that. They know Tea Party Republicans have been pushing us towards this crisis for months. And they're going to know why a shutdown happened should the Tea Party refuse to pass the Senate's clean, continuing resolution to keep the government open. Madam President, allowing our government to shut down isn't in anyone's best interest, not Republicans, not Democrats, and above all, not the American people. So I would like to call on Speaker Boehner to take one simple step. I ask simply that he allow a vote on the Senate's clean continuing resolution because, Madam President, I truly believe that given the chance, enough Republicans in the House would join with the Democrats in voting for a clean continuing resolution to keep the government open, to just keep the government open so we can deal with the bigger issues in front of us. Speaker Boehner takes that step, we could avoid all the disruption, all the harm that a government shutdown would cause to the families and communities we serve. And then we could move forward and continue our work, critically important, on a longer-term budget deal that ends this governing by crisis and puts our families and our economy first. That's what families across the country expect. It's what my fellow constituents in the state of Washington expect. It's what I'm fighting for, and that is what we should deliver. Thank you, and I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Alexander. It's about 3.5 hours from the start of the new fiscal year and the end of current government funding and a possible government shutdown. The House right now is voting on the latest measure to fund the federal government through December 15th. And as you've been hearing on the Senate floor, it includes an amendment to delay the mandate that individuals buy health insurance for a year and language to eliminate health insurance subsidies for members of Congress and their staffs. Our Capitol Hill producer says Senate floor sources are saying that the Senate will vote on the motion to table or kill the House amendment at around 9:30 Eastern Time. And Senator Reid's spokesman says it's taking the House hours to set up this vote, but it'll only take the Senate 15 minutes or so to reject it and send it back a clean CR. Senator from Maryland.
Madam President, I ask that the call of the quorum be vacated.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise today to once again talk about where we are, where we ought to be, and where I hope we'll be. Madam President, right now, it is now 8:30 at night. We are 3.5 hours, essentially until the government begins to shut down. Can you believe this? We are the United States of America. We are a superpower. We're supposed to be a nation governed by rule of law, and we're about to shut down. Not shut us down because of a catastrophic event that hit us. It's not like a meteor has streaked across the sky and has hit the United States of America, taking out our power grid and rendering us powerless. It's not like we've been hit by a global pandemic that would bring us to our knees, we are in an act of self-inducement about to shut down the functioning of the United States of America's government. I find this shocking. Now, I lived through this in the mid-1990s. It is deeply disturbing to the people who work for the federal government, who get up every day and go to their job trying to perform a service or a function that they consider important to the United States of America, whether it's in transportation, protecting the environment, federal law enforcement, important financial regulatory agencies, the Consumer Protection Agency for our financial services, the Consumer Product Safety Commission in my own state to protect ourselves and particularly our children against harmful products, but they're going to be shut down. And you know what's going to be told to them? Men and women who work for the United States of America, most of you are considered non-essential. Now, that might be a witty throwaway line on a cable TV show, but I happen to think they're very essential, and so does the rest of America. People who are doing very important functions to protect America. The House feels that it protected America by passing a military pay bill. The Senate passed it by unanimous consent. But guess what, Madam President? It still means that almost 50% of the men and women who work at the Department of Defense will be furloughed tomorrow. They're going to be told that they're non-essential. Now, who's essential to defense and who isn't? We certainly know that our men and women who wear the uniform, who are in harm's way, need to get their pay. They need to get their supplies. They need to get what they need to do to defend America, but they also need a fully functioning Department of Defense. I think that there are other agencies that protect the United States of America, one of which is our federal law enforcement, whether it's the FBI, whether it's the Marshal Services, whether it's the Drug Enforcement Agency, yes, and the Alcohol and Firearms and Tobacco Agency. Yes, they put themselves in the line of fire, too, along with our customs and our border agents, some of whom have already died. And what about our prison guards who are up there facing people who are ready to either kill them or break out or break them up at the first chance they can get? Now, we don't have to pursue this route. Remember, this is self-induced. But it is really, as our president said, being induced by one faction in one party, in one house of our government, over one issue. Not funding, but should we fund the President's Affordable Care Act? It's the law of the land. It's already in existence, and a good part of it will go into effect on October 1st. What we should be debating, and now when I talk about this, I really speak from the standpoint that I chair the committee called the Appropriations Committee. That is the committee that puts money in the federal checkbook that keeps the entire discretionary funding for the United States of government in the federal checkbook to keep it operating. It is $1 trillion. Wow, what a number. Gasp. And you know what? It is a big number, but it's a big country with big responsibilities. That's not the total funding of the federal government because there's mandatory spending. Mandatory spending are our Social Security benefits, our veterans benefits, earned benefits. All of that is over several other trillion. Now, there is a dispute about how much the spending should be. Madam President, that is an honest dispute. That's what funding disputes and resolutions about those should be about. That's what I should be in a room right this very minute with my House counterpart, Congressman Hal Rogers, the Republican chairman, a fine, honorable man from Kentucky, and my Democratic counterpart, Congresswoman Nita Lowey from New York. And I should be in that room with my vice chairman, Senator Richard Shelby, another fine Southern gentleman, a fiscal conservative. We should be there doing it. But that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about what is the House number, what is the Senate number, what is the best number to fund our government and do it in a way that's smart, effective, and frugal. Oh, no. The big fight is over Obamacare. That's not what it should be. We've had something called continuing resolutions before. A continuing resolution should have another word in it, funding. It is about the continuing funding resolution. And it's to keep government funding while we resolve our disputes. They were always, one, short-term. Number two, they focused on fiscal differences. Where did we disagree on fiscal matters? Now, there is disagreement. The House marked up their bills primarily to $988 billion. That acknowledged that sequester is the new normal. We in the Senate, we marked up at the number that I used, which was $1.058 trillion. The number that I used came from the Senate-passed budget bill under the chairmanship of Senator Patty Murray. So there's a $70 billion difference between the House and the Senate. You know what, Madam President? That is an honest dispute. Now, I'm ready to negotiate with Congressman Rogers, but I'm not ready to capitulate. What does capitulate mean? That we don't even get to a number because we're fighting about Obamacare. We should be discussing what is the way to do this. I'm willing to see is there a compromise, because my goal is that in December we will have passed all of the funding bills. We would have canceled sequester for 2 years, and we would have formed a compromise on that number that does reduce public debt. We acknowledge that, but also makes public investments that create jobs and growth in our country. Those would be transportation, research and development, and things that we can also make and sell overseas. These are the kinds of things that we want to invest in. Physical infrastructure, human infrastructure like education, research and development, and have a pro-growth, pro-American future kind of approach. I want to get to that debate. I want to get to that discussion. I want to get to that conference, but I cannot get to it because we're fighting over Obamacare. Now, somehow or another, that's supposed to be kind of a sarcastic thing to call it Obamacare. I think we need to respect our President of the United States. I call it the Affordable Care Act, but if people want to call it Obamacare, let them do it. The President does care. He does care that 42 million people don't have health insurance, and that we needed to reform our health care system to get more value for our dollar and get rid of the punitive practices of insurance companies of denying people health care on the basis of a pre-existing condition. And by the way, as a consumer advocate, you know this, charging women much more for insurance than men do of comparable age and health status. So I come to the floor tonight, and I say to my House colleagues, I served in the House, please, let's stop the ideological amendments and get on to what appropriations are supposed to be, what a continuing resolution is supposed to be, a short-term approach. That's why I'm recommending November 15th, to get us to the point where we have compromised on fiscal matters. How can we end sequester for 2 years? How can we pass all of our funding bills, and how can we come to a sensible compromise on the $70 billion difference between us? Now, we've tried everything we know. Senator Murray worked very hard to pass the budget bill. We passed it in a marathon session, and I was proud of us. Really, we worked hard. Great debate. It was hard-fought, but at the end we had over 70 votes. Then Senator Murray did what the law requires. She said she wanted to go to conference, along with her Vice Chairman, Ranking Member, Senator Sessions. 6 Republican senators objected. So we have yet to be able to even have a conference to get to the overall budget, which is about what our tax policy should be, our approach to mandatory spending, and a target number for me to reach with my appropriations members on both sides of the aisle. Well, we never got to that. So we marked up our bills and appropriations. We followed the guidelines given to us by the Senate bill at $1.058 trillion. We've been in frequent conversation with Congressman Rogers and Congressman Lowy. That's the way Senator Shelby and I work. We have frequent conversations, but we're talking to ourselves. But now I'm talking to the American people. Don't you want an orderly process? You know, the founders of our country said we would not be a government of personalities and plebiscites and wins and whims. We would be a government of institutions and laws and a process within our parliamentary form of government for resolving disputes. Let's get back to regular order. Let us pass a simple, straightforward, continuing resolution to keep the government open until November 15th, with the direction where we end sequester, come up with a compromise on the funding, and at the same time be able to pass all of our bills. I think we can do it. I think there's the will. I think there's the wallet. We just need to find the way, and the way for the House is give us a clean, straightforward bill. Let's pass it over here. Let's keep America open, and let's keep America running. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Mr. Leader.
Albert Einstein said, when defining insanity, as follows, quote, doing the same thing over and over again and thinking you're going to get a different result. Einstein was a genius, but it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the proof is watching the House Republicans, because they've lost their minds. They keep trying to do the same thing over and over again. They have voted to repeal Obamacare 45 or 46 times. Now that's kind of a lot of repetition. And now they're trying to do it again. They just passed over there another piece of legislation to try to defeat, get rid of Obamacare. Madam President, Obamacare is the law. We had a couple of Republicans today come and talk about the Obama health care bill. That's long since passed. It's the law. Do I need to remind everyone again? The United States Supreme Court said it's constitutional. But the Speaker, instead of allowing all 435 members of the House of Representatives to vote, keep the government open for business, he's once again pushing for a government shutdown. I think this is what they want. Remember, they don't believe in government. So what's a real good way what's a good way to really hurt government? Shut it down. The House once again has attached ridiculous policy writers that are dead on arrival over here. I've heard this story before, in fact, just 6 hours ago. Republicans will once again threaten to shut down the government unless Democrats repeal Obamacare for a year. But once again, we will not relitigate the health care debate or negotiate at the point of a gun. And this time the House has attached a poison pill that would punish 16,000 congressional staff. The amendment originally offered by the junior senator from Louisiana would force congressional staff to cover their full cost of their health care. Now, think about this for a minute. Others have thought about it. The newspaper Politico said yesterday, in perfectly explaining the hypocrisy of this approach, and saying this, and I quote, "Some health care opponents claim the Obama administration is giving members of Congress and their staffs special treatment under the Affordable Care Act." Continue quote, "The claim is simply false. Although they will be required to enroll in health plans offered within the new health insurance exchanges established under the law, members of Congress and their staffs will not receive extra financial help to pay for their medical care. In reality," they go on to say, "it's the critics, as part of their ongoing assault on the health care law, who are seeking special treatment for Congress by proposing to make members and their staffs the only workers in the United States whose employer is barred from law from helping cover their premiums." Close quote. I repeat, in reality, it's the critics, Politico said, as part of their ongoing assault on the health care law, who are seeking special treatment for Congress by proposing to make members and their staffs the only workers in the United States whose employer is barred by law from helping cover their premiums. Madam President, like 150 other Americans who get their health care through their jobs, a portion of the cost of congressional staff health care premiums is currently covered by their employer. Their employer is the federal government. There's about 6 million of us. In other words, members of Congress and congressional staff live by the same rules as other Americans and other federal employees. As a matter of fact, all members of Congress will be getting their health care on marketplace exchanges just like tens of millions of other Americans. 600,000 Nevadans are now eligible. They'll start signing up tomorrow. But House Republicans want to force our staff, who work so hard, to live by a different set of rules. Although many of these Republicans have gladly allowed the federal government to pay for a portion of their own health insurance, for years, decades, some of them, they now want to force 16,000 congressional employees to cover the full cost of the health insurance. If Republican senators believe they should bear the full cost of their own health insurance, they should decline the employer contribution and pay their own way. They should stop being hypocritical. They should practice what they preach. But punishing 16,000 innocent congressional workers is simply mean-spirited. Speaker Boehner knows this new amendment won't last any longer than the last one once it gets to the Senate, and it should be quick. The Senate will vote it down, and the House Republicans will be in the same pickle they're in right now, but even with less time left before the government shuts down. But there's still a way for the Speaker to get out of this quagmire, to get out of this ditch, this hole that they've dug for themselves. But, Mr. President, I'm not sure they want out of this hole, because common sense dictates if you want to get out of the hole, stop digging deeper. But they do that. They're over there now figuring how glad they are the hole is deeper than it ever was, because I believe there's a significant number, if not the majority, of the House Republicans want the government to close. So here's what the Speaker should do to get out of this hole that he's dug. Let the House vote, all 435 members, on the continuing resolution that we passed. We did it on Friday. We affirmed that this afternoon. Stop standing in the way, I say to the Speaker. John Boehner, let the House work its will. If Speaker Boehner prevents the Senate bill from coming to the floor before midnight, the responsibility for this government shutdown is clearly a Republican government shutdown and will rest squarely on his shoulders, as all America knows.